Beloved soul, be still for a moment and breathe in the mercy of God. When the heart trembles and the mind runs restless paths, we do not argue with the storm. We kneel beneath the shelter of prayer. Psalm 86 rises like a gentle incense, teaching us not to shout our fears away, but to lay them softly before the Lord who listens. Hear the quiet confidence of this prayer. Incline your ear, O Lord, and answer me. Anxiety tells us we are alone, unheard, uncovered. But faith whispers otherwise. The God who formed your inward parts is not distant from your inward battles. He bends low to the troubled heart. He covers not only the body, but the thoughts that wound us in secret. When fear presses in, we do not command our minds by force. We surrender them by trust. We say, "Teach me your way, O Lord." In this surrender, the mind learns rest. The soul remembers its true home. The weight that tightened the chest loosens, not because circumstances changed, but because God drew near. Let this prayer be your covering. Lord, gather my scattered thoughts. Quiet the noise within me. Unite my heart to fear your name alone, and not the shadows that pass for truth. You are gracious and merciful, slow to anger, rich in steadfast love. Under such mercy, anxiety has no lasting voice. Remain here in this stillness. Let the Lord answer you with peace that does not strive, with calm that does not fade. Your mind is safe in his keeping. Your soul is held. Be at rest. Anxiety is quieted not by resistance, but by humble prayer. And this truth unfolds slowly, like dawn rather than lightning. The restless mind believes it must be conquered, subdued, or silenced by effort. Yet the soul knows another way. Resistance hardens fear, gives it shape and strength, and turns the inner life into a battlefield. Prayer, however, does not wage war. It opens the heart. When the soul leans toward God, it does not argue with its own weakness, but confesses it. And in that confession, peace begins its gentle work. The covering of God is not drawn down by forceful words or perfect thoughts, but by the simple turning of the heart toward him who is already near. The anxious mind is often loud because it feels alone. It rehearses danger, imagines loss, and multiplies outcomes that never arrive, all because it believes it must guard itself. In this state, the mind becomes its own protector, judge, and guide, and the weight is too heavy to bear. Prayer interrupts this lonely labor. When the soul prays, it admits that it was never meant to carry itself. It places the burden back into the hands that formed it. This act, though quiet and unseen, shifts the center of gravity within the heart. Fear no longer stands at the center. Trust takes its place, not as a feeling, but as a posture. Humble prayer does not begin with confidence, but with need. It speaks plainly and without ornament. It does not pretend strength where there is none. This humility is not weakness, it is truth. Anxiety feeds on false responsibility, the belief that everything depends on us. Prayer restores right order by returning responsibility to God. In doing so, it loosens the tight grip the mind has on imagined control. The soul exhales, sometimes for the first time in a long while, and in that breath there is room for peace to enter. Peace does not arrive as a sudden absence of anxious thoughts. Often, those thoughts still pass through the mind like clouds across the sky. The difference is that prayer changes the sky itself. The thoughts no longer define the weather of the soul. They are observed rather than obeyed. In prayer, the heart learns to rest beneath a greater reality, one that does not rise and fall with emotion. This is why prayer quiets anxiety without fighting it. It lifts the soul above the noise by anchoring it in something unshaken. When prayer becomes the leaning of the soul, rather than a task of the mind, it begins to cover the inner life the way a garment covers the body. This covering is not felt all at once. It is known over time through repeated turning toward God in moments of unrest. Each prayer, however small, adds another layer of trust. The anxious mind is trained by habit, and so is the peaceful soul. Prayer gently retrains attention, teaching the heart where to look when fear rises. Instead of scanning the horizon for threats, the soul learns to look upward and inward toward mercy. The covering of prayer does not remove responsibility from daily life, but it removes the crushing weight of ultimate responsibility. The soul still acts, decides, and labors, yet it does so from a place of rest rather than panic. Anxiety demands immediate answers. Prayer teaches patience. Anxiety demands certainty. Prayer teaches dependence. Anxiety isolates. Prayer reconnects the soul to God and through Him to its own true self. Many attempt to silence anxiety by commanding their thoughts, repeating words of reassurance, or distracting themselves with constant activity. These methods may provide temporary relief, but they do not heal the root. The root of anxiety is often a broken sense of safety. Prayer restores safety not by changing circumstances, but by restoring relationship. The soul remembers it is seen, known, and kept. This remembrance is stronger than reassurance because it is relational rather than logical. It settles deeper than thought into the very sea of being. In humble prayer, the soul does not present a polished version of itself. It brings confusion, fatigue, and fear into the presence of God without shame. This honesty is itself calming. The anxious mind is exhausted by performance, by the effort to appear composed, even to itself. Prayer allows the soul to lay down this performance. In the presence of God, there is no need to explain or justify the fear. It is enough to be present and to be held. As prayer continues, something subtle changes. The soul begins to trust not only God, but the process of turning to Him. The fear may still come, but it no longer feels final. It becomes a signal rather than a verdict, a reminder to lean again. Over time, the space between the rising of anxiety and the return to prayer grows shorter. The soul learns its refuge. This learning is not intellectual. It is lived, shaped by repetition and grace. The covering that prayer provides is not a barrier that keeps all trouble out, but a shelter that keeps the soul intact within trouble. Anxiety fractures attention, pulling the mind into past regrets and future fears. Prayer gathers what has been scattered. It unites the heart, not by erasing memory or anticipation, but by placing them under a greater awareness of God's presence. The soul becomes whole again, centered rather than divided. Trust, in this sense, is not blind optimism. It is the steady decision to rest in God's character rather than in one's own understanding. This trust grows quietly. It does not announce itself with emotion or certainty. Often it is simply the willingness to pray again when the fear returns. This willingness is precious. It is the seed of peace, planted again and again in the soil of the heart. When the soul leans toward God in prayer, it also learns to listen. Anxiety speaks in urgency. Prayer speaks in stillness. Prayer speaks in stillness. In the quiet that follows prayer, the mind begins to distinguish between the voice of fear and the deeper assurance of God's nearness. This assurance does not always come as words. Sometimes it is a sense of steadiness, a slowing of breath, a softening of the body. These are signs that the soul is remembering where it belongs. The quieting of anxiety through prayer does not make a person passive. On the contrary, it makes action clearer and more faithful. Decisions made from panic are reactive and exhausting. Decisions made from prayer are grounded and patient. The soul acts not to escape fear, but to follow wisdom. Even difficult paths are walked with greater calm when the heart knows it is not walking alone. Humble prayer also teaches the soul compassion for itself. Anxiety often carries self-judgment, the belief that one should be stronger, calmer, more faithful. Prayer dissolves this harshness by placing the soul before mercy. In that mercy, the heart learns to be gentle with its own weakness. This gentleness further quiets anxiety, which thrives on inner criticism. When the soul is treated with kindness, fear loses much of its power. The covering of prayer extends beyond the moment of prayer itself. It lingers, shaping the way the soul meets the world. Over time, the anxious patterns of thought loosen. They may still appear, but they no longer dominate. The soul has learned another rhythm, another way of responding. This is not the result of willpower, but of relationship. The soul has leaned, and in leaning, it has been held. Thus, anxiety is quieted not by resistance, but by humble prayer. Thus, anxiety is quieted not by resistance, but by humble prayer. The soul does not need to win an argument with fear. It needs to rest in truth. Prayer provides this rest by reconnecting the heart to God's presence and care. In that presence, the restless mind finds covering, not as a reward for strength, but as a gift for trust. Peace begins there, quietly, faithfully, and endures not because fear never returns, but because the soul knows where to turn when it does. True calm comes from surrendering the inner noise to divine mercy, and this surrender is neither sudden nor dramatic. It is a slow unfastening of the soul from the tight knots it has learned to tie around itself. The heart carries many voices within it. Fears remembered from past wounds, 1. FOD wounds, W. Arnin shaped by disappointment, expectations imposed by the world, and desires that have not yet found rest. Together they form a constant murmur that the mind mistakes for reality. Anxiety grows loud where this murmur goes unquestioned. Surrender does not attempt to silence these voices by force. It places them gently into the presence of mercy, where they lose their authority. The inner noise is powerful because it claims to protect us. It tells the soul to stay alert, to remain tense, to prepare for harm before it arrives. Over time, this vigilance becomes exhausting. The heart is never allowed to rest, never permitted to trust. Surrender begins when the soul recognizes that this constant guarding has not brought peace. It admits that protection born of fear cannot heal fear. In this admission, the heart opens itself to a different kind of safety, one rooted not in control but in care. Divine mercy is not an abstract idea offered to calm the mind. It is a living reality that receives the soul as it is. When the heart surrenders its noise to mercy, it does not organize its fears into neat prayers or offer polished words. It simply brings the chaos itself. Mercy does not demand clarity before it offers comfort. It meets the soul in confusion and begins its quiet work there. This is why surrender is so powerful. It does not wait for peace in order to trust. It trusts in order to receive peace. The act of surrender feels unsettling at first because the mind is accustomed to effort. Anxiety thrives on activity. It prefers constant thinking, planning, and rehearsing over stillness. When the soul begins to surrender, the mind resists, fearing that silence will lead to harm. Yet it is in this very silence that healing begins. Silence in the presence of mercy is not emptiness. It is fullness without noise. It allows the heart to feel held rather than threatened. As the soul surrenders, it learns to distinguish between fear and reverence. Fear scatters the heart, pulling it in many directions at once. Reverence gathers the heart, uniting it around a single truth. When the heart is united in reverence, it no longer bows to every anxious thought. It learns to stand still before God, acknowledging His greatness and goodness. This acknowledgement reorders the inner life. Fear loses its position of command and becomes only one voice among many, no longer the loudest or the final one. The uniting of the heart is a gentle process. It does not happen by suppressing parts of oneself, but by bringing every part into the light of mercy. The anxious part, the weary part, the doubting part, and even the angry part are all welcomed. In mercy, nothing is rejected, and because nothing is rejected, and because nothing is rejected, nothing needs to soft. None, not because it has been defeated, but because it has been received. Surrender teaches the soul that peace is not the absence of feeling, but the presence of trust. Feelings continue to rise and fall, but they no longer define the soul's stability. Trust provides a deeper ground. It allows the heart to experience emotion without being ruled by it. This is where true calm takes root. It is not fragile or dependent on circumstances. It remains even when the mind is aware of difficulty, because it rests in mercy rather than in outcome. Divine mercy also changes the way the soul relates to time. Anxiety is often trapped between regret and anticipation, endlessly revisiting what has been and what might be. Surrender brings the soul back into the present moment, where mercy is always available. In this present, the heart discovers that it is not abandoned. The awareness of mercy here and now weakens the grip of imagined futures and unchangeable pasts. The soul becomes anchored. As the heart practices surrender, it learns to let go of the demand to understand everything. Anxiety often insists on explanation, on knowing why things happen and how they will unfold. Mercy does not always explain, it assures. This assurance is quieter than answers, but stronger. It tells the soul that it is safe to not know, that it is held even in mystery. This acceptance of mystery is deeply calming, because it releases the mind from an impossible burden. When fear loses its voice, it is not because it has been silenced permanently, but because it has lost its authority. The heart no longer obeys fear automatically. It listens, but it does not bow. Reverence has taken fear's place. Reverence does not deny danger or pain, but it places them within a larger truth. It remembers who God is, and in that remembrance, the soul finds perspective. What once felt overwhelming becomes bearable, not because it is smaller, but because the soul is no longer facing it alone. Surrender to mercy also reshapes the inner dialogue. The harsh, accusing voice that often accompanies anxiety begins to fade. In its place comes a gentler awareness, one marked by patience rather than urgency. The soul begins to speak to itself with compassion, reflecting the mercy it receives. This internal kindness further quiets anxiety, which thrives on self-judgment. When the heart is treated with mercy, it becomes a place of refuge rather than conflict. True calm is sustained by repetition. Surrender is not a single act, but a daily turning. Each time the inner noise rises, the soul is invited to release it again. This repetition is not failure, it is formation. Over time, surrender becomes more natural. The heart learns the way back to mercy more quickly. The noise may still arise, but it does not linger long or wander as deeply. The soul has been trained by grace. In surrender, the soul also learns humility. It accepts its limits without despair. It no longer demands perfection from itself. This humility is freeing. It allows the heart to rest in being rather than striving. Anxiety feeds on the belief that one must always be more, do more, foresee more. Mercy interrupts this belief with acceptance. The soul is loved as it is, not as it hopes to be. This truth is profoundly calming. As reverence deepens, the heart becomes simpler. Many competing concerns lose their urgency. What truly matters becomes clearer. This simplicity is not narrowness, but focus. The soul is no longer pulled apart by countless worries. It is gathered around a single center. From this center, life is engaged with greater clarity and peace. Decisions are made more slowly, responses more thoughtfully. Calm shapes action from within. Surrender does not remove pain from life, but it removes the added suffering created by resistance. When the soul stops fighting its own fear and instead offers it to mercy, energy is freed. This energy becomes available for love, for service, for endurance. The heart is no longer consumed by inner struggle. It is strengthened by quiet trust. In time, the soul discovers that calm is not something it must create. It is something it receives. Mercy gives what effort cannot produce. This gift is not dramatic or overwhelming. This gift is not dramatic or overwhelming. It is steady and faithful. It holds the soul through ordinary days and difficult nights alike. It does not promise that fear will never return, but it promises that fear will never rule. Thus, true calm comes from surrendering the inner noise to divine mercy. When the heart is united in reverence, fear loses its voice, not because it has vanished, but because it no longer commands obedience. The mind rests securely, not in certainty or control, but in nearness. This rest is deep and enduring. It carries the soul through unrest without being shaken, teaching it to dwell in peace that is quiet, faithful, and strong.